Hello YouTube. Today we're going to look at the Sig Mosquito 22 long rifle practice pistol. And I say practice pistol because this is designed by Sig to be the same size and weight as the full-size Sig line of pistols, so the 220 through the 229 and everything in between, essentially. The idea was something with the same grip angle, same positions for the decocker, the safety, excuse me, the takedown lever. Most of the SIGs don't have the safety. But the point is, the idea was to give you something that you could practice with that had the same feel, other than recoil, and a cheaper caliber. And so that's what they came up with. A lot of people like it as a 22. I think it has some various issues. We'll get into that as we go. So, without going too far into it, right now, we're just going to get started here. And I'm just picking out my correct screwdrivers to undo this with the least amount of carnage. So, standard 22 style magazine, and nothing in our chamber. It does have, as I mentioned, a decocker. It has a slide based safety, and it's got a magazine safety. It is a double single. So it will pull the hammer, or it will also just drop the hammer. And that's really everything that we need to go over from the outside. To take the firearm down, you take this lever and you rotate it 180 degrees. So normally it's pointing all the way to the back. We want to rotate it all the way around, point it towards the front. At this point, we'll be able to take the slide to the rear and lift it straight up, about ½ inch off the frame, and then guide it forward, and it will come off. And then we have our recoil rod and spring. Now, it is important to pay attention to the fact that this back side of the recoil spring is much smaller than this front side. On the front side, there's a lot of room for moving left and right. On the back side, it's not a tight fit, but a close fit to the sides. The open wide end is the front, and that's so that when it's when you're getting it together, there's no chance of the coils binding as it goes through the end. If we have it backwards, you can see that last coil. If the light's just right anyway, you might be able to see it in there. And the point is that with a wide coil at the end, you don't have any risk of the spring working its way out the front side, and it makes it easier to put back together. Now we're going to go ahead and set the frame aside and dig in just a little bit here. And I'm poking around for the right size Allen wrenches. Well, let's see if we can't just get them out of the big set. Nope, too small. It's a Sig, so I'm guessing these are metric. And I'm also guessing that I think I want to take off the left side. Oh, you know what? If it ain't a 2 and it ain't a 2.5, it might actually be standard. Wouldn't that be different? This is one of the most annoying things about hex wrenches. So what I'm finding so far is that a 5/64 will fit in there, but the amount of wiggle room tells me that that's not the right size. So before I go putting torque on that, I'm going to double check the metrics to make sure I didn't misjudge something. And my issue here is that a 1.5 was too small, and the 2 that's what it is. Magic number 2. Alright, so I'm going to unscrew this. I'm going to keep a finger on both sides of this guy here as I do this, because I think there is a spring and a detent. It's been a long time since I had one of these apart. And I just want to be careful not to lose those till I find out exactly what they are. If I recall, there is a spring and a ball bearing embedded in the actual side of the of one of these levers, so we want to be careful not to lose that. So now that one side is unscrewed, we'll see if we can't get under that and start it up. And did I choose wisely? I did. So the way this works, if you can see that the pin going through there has the screw hole in the center. It's also got a flat side that mates up with a flat side in the actual safety throw bar, and that way it actually rotates that whole center piece. And if I'm correct, what we can do here is begin to work our safety out. So what we're doing, this entire mechanism is going to eventually come out of the gun. It includes the firing pin safety, the extractor system, and the firing pin itself. And it's all actually held in by the safety going as a cross member through it. And there is the ball I was looking for, that ball bearing. I'm going to be careful not to lose that bad boy. So what you'll see on this leg is a very, very tiny spring and a very, very tiny ball bearing. You want to hang on to these because you basically have to have it just like that to reassemble, and that bearing pretty much moves on that spring, but it's really easy to lose. So I'm going to set those off to the side, hopefully not lose track of it. So now this piece is essentially free to come out if we can locate everything that's holding it in. So this steel insert into the frame hooks over the front, so it's likely we're going to have to move it forward a bit to get it to come out. And the other thing I'm checking here is to make sure I didn't forget something. And I don't think I did. So I'm just going to get something that we can get behind this with. Give it a bit of a shove. You know what? I always forget these things. There's two things holding this in, and don't just hammer on it like I just did. The rear sight is also serving two other functions. It's an adjustable sight, and as we adjust it, we're going to get to a point where adjusting it off to one side is actually going to release the whole mechanism. And I think I adjusted it off to the wrong side for that purpose. Go the other way. Yes, I can feel it coming loose on the bottom. So basically, as you're adjusting this, you're moving it to the right, and at the end of how far it can unscrew, you'll feel it disengage from the rest of it. And now we've got some motion going on in here, which is what we were hoping for. I don't think we have to take that all the way off. I think we just, yes, we just have to get it off to the side of it, and then everything comes spewing out. So I'm going to take that the rest of the way off so we can see that mechanism and give you a better sense for how that works before we get all up in there. So let me quickly just put this guy back together. There were several different springs in action here, and it's a little hard to understand the whole thing from the inside, or from the outside rather, until you can see it. So this is how everything was situated up in the top of the slide. Now this spring and this is just the firing pin safety, so I'm going to set that aside. But these guys are the locking mechanism, and so what happens is that this is actually a threaded hole, and that sticks up through this left side, and then the sight sits on here and actually screws into that hole. And on the screw for the adjustable sight, the barrel of the screw has flat sides, and then this spring and flat topped detent here are going to give it kind of that snapping position, so as you're moving the sight over, you get distinct clicks, 1, 2, 3, as you're moving it. So to get everything apart, we basically just had to unscrew this, so this was free from this piece. So once we unscrewed it and moved it off to the right, then the whole mechanism was free to pop out of the gun. No other moving parts in the frame. I'm going to go ahead and dump that spring and detent back out. They don't operate anything else in the gun. They are solely for the adjustable sight. And just set those guys over here. And now you can get a good view of what's going on. So this little lip hooks over, and then that piece came through and up. And that's the other thing besides the safety that's holding it together. So you unscrew that, you get the safety out, and then that can rotate down far enough that you can unhook it from the lip. So since this is empty, we're going to set him aside and look at the remaining parts. So let's take a minute to just pay attention to how the firing pin safety works. That spring will be bottoming out at the top of the slide, so it is going to provide springy pressure. And when it's down in its normal position, basically there's a cutout in the firing pin where the firing pin is going to be blocked by this. And when we lift it up, we make a little tunnel, and the firing pin can come past it. So take that off, and we're going to look at the front end at that firing pin in action. So it's got a fairly robust firing pin for the most part. It's going to get a fairly hefty strike in on the rim of the cartridge, practically down to the middle. So this, as I recall, gives a relatively solid strike, fairly reliable. There's a fairly stiff spring under it. It is not an inertia firing pin. If the firing pin bottoms out, then that generally is probably enough. Oh, I'm sorry, I lied. It is inertial. So what I mean by inertial is if we put the firing pin as far in as it can go till it bottoms out against the back. In other words, as far as the hammer could push it, if the hammer was just leaning on it. If we don't get good protrusion, it means that the way it works in real life is the firing pin the hammer hits it and then imparts enough momentum to take it past that point. And so it does its actual striking after the hammer has left it. So the hammer has to hit this pretty hard to get it going fast enough to give you enough strength left over to pop that primer. So you can tap this out, I believe, without too much effort. And see that firing pin in its spring system. So the firing pin is restricted in how far it can move by the pin going through it. There's the cutout where the safety goes, and then this part at the front. This one's been monkeyed with a bit, so yours might be a little sharper on the edges. I think this was a replacement, and it just had a lot of burrs, and I was just smoothing it out. And then on the inside, there is a shaft down, a shaft where the spring can lay, and the spring is going to operate against this back part, and that's just pushing the firing pin back after it's been hit. And now the other piece in here. Oh, by the way, there's a wide end to this and a narrow end. Make sure you push it out, towards the wide end. You don't want to drive the wide end through the body, and you'll just monkey things up. This pin is really small. If your punch is at all mangled, which mine is, it may be too wide to actually get in there. I usually have to refile down my punch when this happens, and I used to keep one filed down. I'm looking around for it. And maybe SOL. Let me grab a file real quick. Do some brief surgery with our fine Chinese punches. So the idea is that since I've used this punch, the tip is a little bit flattened out. It is hardened tool steel and all that good stuff, but it's not perfect. And I abuse my punches fairly regularly, as you've probably noticed. So long as that end is just a little bit splayed out, it's going to be too wide for that particular hole. That's a really, really thin pin. No real room for error there. So now I'm not sharpening this to a point. I'm just getting the big burr off where I've hammered on it in the past and flattened the tip out a little. Now it should be narrowed in enough that I can tap it through. And we're going to be getting out several different pieces. There's the extractor, its big spring, and then there's two other aluminum guides that go on either side of it. So, yeah, I've tapped the pin all the way out. Again, this pin actually has some crimps on the bottom, and it goes up from the bottom, and the bottom is a little wider as a result. And so when you hammer that back in, make sure the crimp side is on the bottom, and that it goes all the way through, and it is flush with the bottom when you're done. So I put some pressure on the extractor as I did that, just to get the pressure off my punch. And now we should see all of these be willing to come out. So this is what they look like. They all share a little bit of that back cutout shape, so they can all pivot around the same point. And the idea is that it's easier for the extractor to move against these than having it move against the actual body, and that prevents it from wearing out the body, and it makes it so it can move more freely, and so that you can get a little more lubrication perfectly evenly on both sides of it. So from a friction standpoint, the extractor isn't really moving against the slide insert, it's just moving against its little steel shims here. And then of course the tail for the for it to push against, for the spring to push against. And our spring. The spring has short, squat, but it does have a hole in there for it to move along, and that, or to stay steady in, I should say. And there's a fine layer of grease on these, and that's great. And it is, it's like most 22 extractors. It's you've got the angled claw, so it can snap over a rim if you've got a rim already in there. And it's going to pull behind it to extract it. That angle bites back just a little. It's not a 90-degree angle. It is a bite angle, so it's going to pull that rim pretty hard. The reason you see this this faced off area down here is because if you did need it to come in, if it wasn't hanging on to rounds tightly enough, this gives you some space where you could file away right here and bring this plane closer to this plane, and that's going to bring in the extractor just a little bit. Now, hopefully you would never have to do that. These are generally made pretty well. If your extractor is getting worn to the point of you doing that, it might be just easier to replace it, as they are readily available and not overly expensive. So I'm going to get these back in, and the critical challenge is, of course, lining them up. And it's not really that bad. Come in through the Alright, so that's got them all lined up, and what I'm going to do now that they're lined up is I'm going to push them in with my finger and just tap the punch right out. And now, like I said, you want this to be perfectly flush when you're done, so it's getting close to flush. So I'm going to set it on a flat enough surface, or I can go back to my punch and now get that tapped in. Now don't worry if one of the legs can flip out like that. That's fine. You don't want to take it all the way out, but it'll lay flat once it's inside the upper. Excuse me. Refresh the drink here. So go ahead and reassemble. I'm going to drop that back in there because I think if we're careful as we put this in, actually no, I'm going to have to do it the other way. We do have to catch that spring on the underside here because it will be in a slightly compressed position as we go. So we can drop the spring in there, but then when we go to put it back together, we have to tip the spring into its correct orientation. So we gotta, there we go. See how the spring is now tipped up, and I've caught it with the firing pin. Now I can actually push the firing pin down to the point where that spring is now under compression, and the firing pin is all the way down and seated. And again, driving that back through, switching over to the punch to tap it back the rest of the way. and that goes in nice like that. So let's go ahead and reassemble that whole slide while we're at it. So our firing pin, there's only one way that this can go. If you put it on the other way, it's going to stand up tall and not seat. So the long leg, you know, has a clearance all the way down, and the short leg does not. Our spring sits in here, and our spring pin sits there. And if we do this correctly, we go to put it up in the frame, or excuse me, up in the slide, we should be able to hook the front edge on, and then have these guys just pop right up. Now, we're going to have to lower them temporarily as we do this, because we've got to get the rear sight at least to basically here, which is almost all the way on, and then we have to push this up at the right time, because we can't push the slide, you know, past that point. But this is not going to be a ton of pressure here. Well, whoops, it wants to sit down there, so for now I will do it. But basically what we can do is we can look from the bottom and adjust to make sure that where this is going to pop through has clearance, and hopefully that looks like it should do it. So I'm going to try this again, hook the front, and see if we've got our clearance. And it feels like we do. So now I'm just going to push it over a little bit, and then see if we can't screw this in. And if we caught it at the right point, we should feel that screw bind in, and yeah, it's holding the whole thing in. And we want to make sure that our adjustment is more or less centered, and it is. So the reason I took the left side off first is, or the right side off first, is because it's really a pain in the butt to deal with this detent. It's going to want to pop all over the place on us, and it's not going to want to stay in its little hole, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it except for just be careful guiding it in. So we're going to hold it, we're going to try and keep that towards the top. We're going to put it in an orientation where the ball will already match one of these grooves, so that when it comes tight on the ball, it should push it in as opposed to ejecting it and sending us crawling all over the floor. And so if I did that right, we should have the snap, and that means that the ball and spring got compressed. And lastly, come around to the other side and put this on. Careful not to push the other side right back out. I think these come with a tiniest bit of blue Loctite on them. You can do that if you're worried about losing them, but please do it sparingly. The last thing you want is to make these hard to get off to the point where you end up stripping them and then losing the ball bearing while you order new ones. Also, the tightness of those screws on the left and right dictate how hard it is to throw the safety. So if these guys are over tight, then it's really hard to manipulate. If they're under tight, then it kind of flops around. So, there. So basically, this is just kind of snug them up to your personal preference. So I like a little more solid. And that's the upper. So, set the upper aside and take a look at the lower. So there's a couple interesting things. This screw is the far side of the takedown lever. I think we see it rotate if I rotate my takedown lever. If we notice when I rotate the lever that this buffered piece here moved. So, of course, now it's out of orientation. There we go. So, my pinky is now holding it in place, but this is what we're doing when we move that takedown lever, is we're changing the position of that aluminum piece. So when it's all the way to the back, that piece is pushed forward. And what that means is that the slide can only come back till it runs into that. And that's not going to be far enough back to get it off the rail system. So when that piece is there, you can't bring it back far enough to assemble or disassemble it. So now remember that piece there, it's also what the recoil spring is sitting in, so it's always going to have pressure on it. So if we do adjust it and we flip this back, it moves to that rear position. And in that rear position, now the slide has room to come back just far enough to clear that lower rail so that we can get it on and off. So that's how that whole mechanism works. When that's a little bit further forward, then this simply can't go back far enough to escape the rail system. And let's go ahead and take the handle off for now. Whoops, what did I do with that other screwdriver? Oh. When you take the grip screws off, you really, on this one, want to make sure you've got a nice set of appropriate screwdrivers that can fit in there. I mean, these screws, they sit down nice and flush, and they have a very thin screw surface. So if you try and get in there with a regular screwdriver, you'll probably monkey it up pretty bad. Once the screws are loose, you can pop it right off. Do keep the screws with the right hole. They are all technically the same size, but the bottom one goes into brass and will already have a layer of brass on it, and you don't want to keep wallering the brass out. So keeping the same screw there keeps it mated. A lot of these mechanisms are similar to the full-size ones. Some are, some aren't. So our takedown looks very similar with that fancy screw system there. I'm going to go ahead and undo the other side first, just so we can see everything at once. Oops. Didn't quite take that off enough. There we go. Alright. Set that aside. Oh yeah. So what I'm going to grab first, since there's nothing else holding it in on this side, is the magazine release. I'm going to hold this by the front here as I do this, because I don't want it to just fly out. There is a spring system in here. It's a little hard to understand until you see it. So this is how it sits in there, and that's how much it moves when you push the magazine release. But if you notice, that's just these two pieces have that little ledge that holds them together and nothing else. So once we disengage these, we want to be careful not to lose the spring. That's what I'm saying here. So it's got a little, rounded area there that it seats, but when you go to put it together, you gotta get it snapped under that ledge and then held sideways. So when you go to put it in, it's gonna want to torque on us, and we have to kind of reach a finger in and get it straightened out to get it all the way through the other side. But since we don't want to have the spring launch, we will separate them for now. Set them aside. We'll go ahead and pop off the the hammer drop lever. So this spring is typical of Sig's designs, and the way it works is this: there's a leg here that catches over on the side on here, and then this piece always locks into a cross member that's actually part of the frame, and it's got that zigzag because of the way the cross member is cut. If you've loosened it, then it can actually come in and out, but when there's tension on it, so I can try and simulate here, then this piece actually locks in and can't come out as easy. Well, obviously without everything there in its way, you can still come out, but it is its own locking mechanism, is what I'm trying to say. Set those guys aside, and oh, this does have a trigger lock, or a hammer lock, I should say. Defeat the magazine safety for us to demonstrate this. Alright. This plastic piece, if it is pushed up and then turned 90 degrees, it'll stay up in there and shorten how far the hammer can come back, and you won't be able to bring the hammer back far enough to cock it anymore. I don't actually have the key on hand, but you get the general idea of how the mechanism works. And so we're going to unscrew this guy first, and as I mentioned, he is the other side of the takedown lever. So once he is unscrewed, you should be able to tap the screw out. Now I'm going to put these just back together to keep track of them. I need to order a new one of this. This one's actually partially sheared off. And now once the takedown lever's out of the way, you reveal the other screw that was hidden to us previously. Unscrew this guy. So now the trigger pin is the only thing left, if I'm not mistaken, that goes all the way through the frame. So once we have the trigger pin, pop him out. The whole inner system should be able to come out of the polymer frame at this point. Just checking to make sure I don't bind up on anything that I forgot about. And I'm doing this by essentially lifting it straight up. And what we're lifting up is this steel insert. And we do want to come straight up as much as possible. There we go. And ta-da. Set the whole thing down for a second. That leaves behind this one last mechanism in the frame, which was that locking system that I was referring to. And so here you can get a sense of how that actually worked in there. Basically, the little end here is all that was exposed. If you pushed it up and then turned it, then these wings would get caught and not be able to drop down as far. So in, I believe, this position, that's going to push It's going to leave that plastic sticking up just that much, just that far out of the frame, and that's enough to block the hammer from coming all the way down. So we're going to set that and the rest of the frame aside. We're going to come over here before this explodes. So this is tricky because right now my hands are all that's holding this together. The especially where the hammer is, this whole mechanism is going to push its way past the two clamshelled halves pretty quickly if we don't hang on to it. And so I wanted to show you that before I popped it out, but what was going on there is we had this spring, which was the underside of the slide hold open lever, and I got it held in with my thumb, and if you can see in there that we're just compressing that little spring, and that's the whole mechanism here. So there is a very small nipple on this end to hold the bottom of the spring, and then the rest of the spring has pretty good amount of space. And that's when everything pops open. So yes, all of the parts just came apart at once, but that's alright. We'll get into it and explain it one at a time. So ignore the giant pile of parts temporarily. We'll get there. Finish explaining the one piece that I was working on, which is this and its mechanism for how it catches this spring. So that little metal pin there is what the spring rides on, and the spring itself just sits on the back there, and that's your pressure for your slide lock. Set that aside. Now, since everything blew up at once, it's a little awkward, but I'm going to show you all the parts. The hammer system has a brass ring at the top, then the spring, and then a brass cup at the bottom, and it sits and pushes up on the hammer, so that's not crazily different from any other hammer system. And what we did kind of miss, let's see, oh, there's one other member here. This is the magazine safety. When the magazine is inserted, this gets pushed, and that brings this block away from the trigger. If this is forward, the trigger will run into it. You won't be able to pull the trigger all the way. This pushed out of the way by the magazine, and then the trigger would be able to fire. This generally stays in the gun. It's crimped in, and so I don't recommend trying to take that pin out if you don't have a suitable way to regenerate that crimp afterwards. You're going to have a bad day. But you can get in there to clean pretty easily. I think that's crimped in there. Yeah. I have no desire to push my luck with that. Likewise, this piece is also crimped into this side of the frame, so we don't want to take any of that apart that we don't have to. Trigger. Trigger is actually going to sit and rotate around that. We took the trigger pin out earlier. I guess I could put the trigger pin back in to demonstrate what I was talking about here. So, magazine safety is stopping the trigger from coming any further back than this. When the magazine is inserted, now the trigger can come through its full range of motion. So that's what I was talking about there. I'm going to set that part of the frame aside and bring in the rest of it that we've got all goopied up here. And this is our sear system, which I will get into in a second. I want to see how much of this I can still salvage for demonstration purposes. There we go. Alright, so our trigger bar. Our trigger bar was sitting in here like this, and it has a spring system where this leg of the spring goes inside a hole, a very small hole on the bottom, excuse me, on the bottom of the trigger bar, and then this other leg goes right into the frame itself. And the trigger will protrude just enough for us to get it onto the trigger bar. There we go. So now with all that there, that's, see the trigger bar actually pull the hammer forward. Unfortunately, too many parts to hold in place at once. So that's our trigger bar, our hammer system. This Sig builds these on most of their systems. This is a mechanism for keeping the hammer from resting on the firing pin. And I think in this case I have to put this in at the same time as the hammer. Basically, this curved leg goes over the bar that goes through the back of the trigger, the pin back there. And so when you put it together, you make sure that that's in place. And so basically, the hammer spring is going to be pushing it forward with significant pressure, but that spring would act to pull it back. And of course, I just let it pop back off. Terrible demonstration. Let's try that one last time. So that's as far as the hammer goes forward, and then that spring is going to act to bring it back. In this case, Sig gives a set of very thin washers to act as bearings again around the hammer, one on each side. I'm going to take those off just so I don't monkey them up during these demonstrations. And there's only a couple other pieces that we've got to show here. The sear is the first one I want to get into. So the sear is this sheet metal, stamped sheet metal. And it's these pieces, these little wings on the side go into the metal frame members and are held steady that way. And once the clamshell is assembled, those things hold pretty stiffly. So the idea, if I can hold it strong enough with my finger, is that that's going to hold, that's your hammer in the cocked position. And then if you notice, on that sear there's a metal dealie on one side. That's probably, in all likelihood, where the trigger bar is going to engage it and pull it back away from the hammer, and that's going to let the hammer come forward. So try and flip it over. You know what, I'm going to go ahead and clamshell it back together for this demonstration. The challenge of clamshelling this thing back together is that you do have to line up an awful lot of things at once. And some of them, like the sear, generate some pressure during that process. All right, so we cocked it. We're held back by the sear, and we said that as our trigger bar came forward, you notice that it is in fact going to grab right there. And when that happens, That's going to cause the sear to come forward enough that the, whoops, well, I might not be able to get enough pressure with just my fat fingers to pull that off. But that's what's going on there, is that the trigger bar, when the trigger is pulled, oh, you know what? You know why it's not doing it? Because there's another piece that engages in there. Yeah, there's the part that engages the firing pin safety is actually involved in this process. And he sits up in here. Which way does he go? So what's actually going to happen is the trigger bar is going to bump against that, which is going to then bump in turn against the part on the sear. So it takes all of those in concert to make it go. And fake put this whole thing together essentially. It might make it easier to demonstrate. Cool. So now you can kind of see what I was talking about. Trigger. Gotta hold all this together. Alright, so as the trigger comes forward, the first thing it's going to do is bump into the firing pin safety, so that will rise. Well, the hammer's cocked a little bit there, and there's a double action. So that's going to bring the firing pin safety up as we also push off the sear. Of course, now I'm fighting the magazine release at the same time. Too many things to disconnect at once. Yeah. Rather than trying to do all of this at once and hold the thing together, we'll just illustrate conceptually that that's what's going on. So, as these parts are in the gun, the trigger bar pushes this forward, that pushes the sear out of engagement, and that's going to let the hammer fall. The double action pull is similar to the rest of Sig's kind of double action designs. So when the hammer is forward and the trigger is pulled, there's a notch on the back on one side of the hammer that's going to pull that back. And right at about the same time that you clear that notch on the bottom, you will also have engaged these two mechanisms and cleared the whole system, and it would drop. So I think that's all the parts. Oh no, let's take a second and look at the barrel. Get back in here in a second, get all those guys together. The takedown lever has a three sides square, one side rounded off piece, and that's how it engages in this other mechanism. And if you pay attention to this aluminum barrel, So this can engage with the with this aluminum cylinder, and because again 3 flat sides, 1 rounded side, it's only going to go in one orientation, and then this is going to rotate this piece. So rotate it all the way to the back, and you've got a flat end here. Rotated it around to the front, you've got these big grooves. Well, this is the piece where that's controlling the adjustment. When this is like this, the back of this piece can go into these grooves in the cylinder. But when I rotate the cylinder, what I'll be doing is I will be effectively pushing this bar forward and off of the cylinder. And then it's got these little grooves here where it'll lock into this stub on the back side. So this is fully assembled. It's being pushed forward, and that's how it all stays locked. The disassembly state is over here, where the spring will be able to push it down into there so you can take the whole thing apart. So that's what's going on when we do our takedown action. And so we put it back together, and we slide this back in the barrel. I want to make sure that we keep that orientation correct, so that we can put it back together. And that means that we should be able to have this piece pushed all the way in, essentially to there. Now it doesn't go all the way back. I mean, that it will sit. I rotate this around. It's actually hard to rotate without the piece. So in this position, you can see how much further forward it is. You've got almost a ½ inch there, and then when it's rotated the other direction, significantly less. So anyway, putting it back together, we just want to put it back together in the disassembled state so that we can get it back on the gun and leave enough room for the screw to get through there in the end. And that's pretty much it. This isn't the threaded model. I think this could still come out. I haven't ever tried it, rebarreling these. Usually, I mean, the barrel is not always fully solid on this one. This one feels like it, but sometimes this is a more hollow tube. In this case, I think they may have actually just created a barrel and still used a sleeve insert for the rifling, but I'm not positive. So feed ramp built in, cut out for the extractor, standard 22 stuff. Alright, so now getting it all back together at the same time is the fun and challenging part. So we are going to do it by setting. So the hammer pin has one end that's far more tapered than the other. We're going to use that to our advantage by putting that end up so that when we go to get the clamshell reassembled, that's essentially already in place. This pin seats in the frame. There's it only goes one way. The big end will go through the other side of the frame, like that, and then the little end actually seats in the frame here. We don't want to put this on yet. Silly me. Till we have this piece in. So that's our firing pin safety lever. One of our washers. Slide this guy on. Drop the other washer on. And the other pieces that we have to get lined up right from the get-go are the sear and yeah, so it's going to go in there. The trigger and the most challenging part, as a general rule, the hammer system, because you kind of have to do this under some hammer pressure. So again, the brass bearing, the hammer, and I'm going to seat him up in there. And if we put all the pressure in the world on him right now, still might not be able to hold everything in place. So let's see. If I were a smart man, rather than put that under all that pressure, I would go ahead and put this at least at the half cock position. And that's going to let us take some of that hammer pressure off. It's also going to hold the sear in a little bit more firmly and give us a little more real estate down here. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so now holding it all together, and that's really the trick for the rest of this assembly, is hanging on to all of that. So if I let my thumb go, those parts are going to go flying across the room, so we don't want to do that. But we do have to get everything else back together. So the first thing you got to do is, because this pin is long, is orient to make sure you're catching that pin in that hole. And then that really starts everything else going on. Trigger pin should show up and be visible. And as we get closer and closer to clamshelling everything together, we will then eventually need to make sure that our sear makes it into the seated position. And right now, that's who's off by just a bit. So I'm going to come in. Oh, look at that. He seated himself just for us. Now I am holding this together under a good bit of pressure. I'm going to seat that hammer pin the rest of the way. And everything feels pretty good here. So again, just remembering that you've got to hold these halves together. You can assemble the rest of it. Well, this, by the way, was the disconnector as well. That's why that piece sticks up through there, is as the slide comes back, that would push it down below all the various sear systems. So that's our disconnect stroke. So with it on the actual on the trigger, we're going to just pop this guy into place like so, and then I gotta remember how to hold the whole thing flat. And now we're going to start this a little bit just so it's a little easier to hang on to, because once we get this guy started into the frame, the frame will help hold it together. So once I just get that far in, I no longer have to worry about the hammer exploding out everywhere. The only thing I'm hanging on to right now is the trigger bar. And of course, do have to actually get the trigger at least far enough down. Maybe I should have done the trigger first. Well, this will be interesting. See if I can actually pull this off. If I cock it, will I be able to hold it? Yes. Oops. There we go. So we're not doing too bad here. Well, obviously the trigger pin's got to come back out for us to get it all the way in, but I'm trying to get everything aligned as we go. And the I guess I'll go ahead and drop the trigger pin out at this point and try and alright, so that's going to hold everything together while we work on the last piece that we got to actually finagle in here. And now I'm going to pull it back out a bit. Just you know, remember to hang on to all the bits when you do this. That if you do pull it partially out, you've got to hold on to that. So what I want to do now is get this spring installed on its little lug there. As long as the frame is holding, you know, our other parts in, we're going to be okay. We just don't want to put it in a position where that's ever not true anymore. Oh, you know what I might have messed up? You know, I forgot to put the safety system back in that at the base, and I'm not going to have enough real estate to do that. So I'm going to grab everything really tightly again and pull it all back out, or at least enough of it back out that I can get this guy in, which is going to be probably all the way back out, or at least significantly far. And of course we have to, there it goes, get that into the unlocked position. Alright, now trigger bar slipped off again, but as long as I don't slip off the spring, I can always reorient this guy, so that's not a big deal if this one is popping off. Oh yeah, the slide release. The reason I stick my pinky in there is to make sure that I don't just knock that spring into the body of the gun. And it looks like I got it. So now, one last time to get the trigger bar oriented. Holding both of those in at once. The frame is holding the hammer system in for me. So now I should be able to continue lining everything up, sliding it back into the frame. Now that the trigger bar is passed, I'm good there. I still have to hold this one as I get in there. I do want to make sure that everybody in the back is going to line up. We don't want to crimp anything as we go, so being careful there. And there we go. So make sure the trigger pin can get all the way through. Should be a pretty straight shot. There we go. So again, you should be able to manipulate this pin pretty much with your fingers. I mean, you're not going to need a hammer is the point. And at this point, it should more or less function. So if we put a magazine in to defeat the magazine safety, single action, double action, you know, it's doing its thing. So let's go ahead and slide our barrel back in. And the long, or the, if you keep your pins, what am I trying to say? The two pins that go through here, one goes into the body, and they have two different sized heads as well. The one with the smaller head, that's how you keep them up. You can, you know, tell them apart. Is that the smaller head one is this first one that comes in and is actually going to screw into the polymer frame on the far side. One, you know, I didn't put in the magazine. Oh yeah, that's fine. I'll put that in later. You don't want to make this so tight that you can't move this. So this still has to be able to, you know, be thumb operable, as it were. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one and then the magazine release. So we put in our hammer drop lever. And we put in always, you know, this part in first, because this is, like I said, it's got a self-locking mechanism, and then stretch over the rest of it. And for the magazine, there's a couple different ways to do it. Really, you got to get it started correctly, and that's half the battle. Because this little raised pin here, that's a cutout in the frame for that, so it can only go through one way, and you have to have that lined up for everything else to work. I'm going to set these together and engage the little lip. And I'm going to try and do this by lining up the one side here, and then knowing that it won't line up on the other side immediately. Oh yeah, well, alright, it just went through for us. So yeah, once you get it through, just what I did there is let it go in at an angle. With I'm not holding it. This is just keeping it from launching. Find its right slot, and it should guide itself right in through the other side. You might have to manipulate it a little bit, but not too much. And remember that the only thing that holds this side in is, in fact, the side panel. So until you screw this on, that's still going to want to flop around all over the place. So this is what we're going to do next to keep that from happening. And again, I kept my screws in the same orientation just so I don't mix up the one that's going through brass with the one that's going through steel. I guess we can, oops. test our hammer drop while we're here. Now, you can see the sear system through the side. So as I go back, you'll see it's in the half cock notch. Now, as we go back, the sear clips over. When I bring the hammer drop up, you can tell that what I'm doing is it's just hitting the bottom of the sear and pushing the sear out of the way, but it's long enough that it gets caught by the hammer as well. So the way Sig likes to make these hammer drops is you're not under a whole lot of pressure till you meet the sear, but once you push the sear out of the way, you're catching the hammer on your thumb as well, and that also just helps it guide down, and almost, it guarantees essentially that the sear will be ready to catch it in the half cock notch, because your thumb is got to ride it back, and it's going to prevent it from just dropping the hammer. So basically the hammer drop is right, you intercept the sear and the hammer, and so now you're no longer intercepting the sear and you're letting the hammer fall, so it lands in the half cock. And wiggle this guy into place. And screw this panel on. Good. Remember, there's a magazine safety, so that's why when I pull the trigger, I'm actually testing a safety, that because the magazine safety is not tripped, it doesn't fire. If I reach in there, I don't know if I can't do it with my pinky. I'd actually have to put a magazine in, and now we get the double action, we get the single action. We test the disconnection stroke. Ugh. Actually, I probably have to push that to there. There's a disconnect. It all works. So I'm going to put the recoil rod and spring in the hole in the takedown buffer, and I'm going to line up the spring system and the barrel. Now you want to be careful when you do this that you pay attention to the rod and the spring. If the spring kinks, stop. Don't risk that spring. That spring needs to stay straight until the rod starts to come out the front. Then we're all good and lined up. But you don't want to risk getting a kink in that spring. It's a bad thing. Whoops. And now we flip the lock lever back to the back. It should no longer be able to come off. And magazine safety one more time. Now, this safety up here we saw is just a trigger blocking safety, so it doesn't affect how the rest of the firearm operates. It's just the the firing pin can't come all the way forward if this safety is engaged. And that's about it. Tighten this guy up one last little bit. Yeah. Since we're not taking it down right now, you can actually tighten this a little more than usual. Just if you do need to field strip it, come back. Technically, a tiny drop of blue Loctite is what's going to hold that in and steady. I find that it's easier to just tighten it an extra tiny bit when you're not going to be field stripping it, and to just, even if you're just field stripping it, come back in here another 1/8 of a turn to give it the range of motion it needs. It's not ever torqued down so much that I can't turn it, so if I needed to field strip it at the range, that would be doable. It just, I don't want it flopping down while I'm shooting. So that's the Sig Mosquito 22 long rifle practice pistol. Hope you guys had fun. Stay safe.